Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to make some predictions. Um, Several people have asked me if I think there's going to be another surge this winter, and I'm going to go over my thoughts on that and how I think this, pandemic is going to play out. And this is a really nice quote, and since I'm about to make some predictions, you can see which camp I fall into. This is a website called Worldometers, and I remember in the beginning parts of the pandemic, I used to look at this website obsessively. I would check it multiple times a day because, I'm a numbers person and I just like to see the numbers. And it's sobering to see the numbers. We've had 250 million COVID cases in the world, 5 million deaths. So this is, almost the entire population of the United States in terms of cases. And this is probably a underestimate of the number of cases that there are because many third world countries don't have very good testing. And so there's probably a lot of uncaptured cases, and the deaths are probably a little bit of an underestimate as well. If you look at the daily new cases, we see like the cases started back in January, and as all things start, they're very low numbers, and then there's this ramp up. This was the initial window when we saw things happening. And then the summer surge right here in the summer of 2020. And then here's the big winter surge um, in 2020 and 2021, early 2021. Then this is the surge from all the cases out of India mostly. And then this is the Delta surge. And we see a little uptick starting here worldwide. So I want to take a look at a couple of countries. This is the United States. Um, as you can tell from this list, the United States is still the worldwide leader in total deaths and cases. India and Brazil following fairly close behind. I suspect the numbers for India and Brazil are slight underestimates, so they are probably a little higher than this. UK is probably a fair estimate. Let's look at the United States. So 50 million cases almost, and going on 800,000 deaths. Um, and so you can see the cases in the United States here. Here's the initial wave here. Most of these were in New York City, in the East Coast. And then this is the summer surge, huge winter surge last winter a year ago, and that was dropping off. And here in the summer, we thought, okay, we got this thing licked. With the numbers were down very low, and then the Delta variant hit, and then it's calming down, and you see a slight uptick here. The one thing to kind of notice is that we seem to have decoupled deaths from cases somewhat, which is good, and that is a sign that treatments are getting better. So you see here, look at the numbers of the wave, and the winter wave was fairly large, and this Delta wave was almost as large as the winter wave, not quite. But if you look at deaths, the Delta wave deaths are much lower than the winter waves. And then you see that the deaths from the initial exposure were much higher compared to their case numbers, which means early on in the pandemic, we did not have a good handle on how to treat these cases. So we had a lot of deaths early on. And then as we figured out how better to treat these, deaths as a percentage of infections got better. And then Sweden, you remember, was a country that had a lot of press written about it because they had a policy of no formal lockdown requirements, and they were a little permissive. Now, their population did a lot of voluntary lockdowns, but it was not mandated by their public health system or their government. But people, if you look at Google data of movements, people in Sweden voluntarily locked it down. They did it of their own accord. But it was less so than many other countries. So they had higher case numbers initially, and it seemingly, they had fewer case numbers, possibly due to their vaccination, natural immunity, that kind of thing. But they have higher case numbers than their corresponding Nordic countries, which they say has to do more with the higher number of migrants they have in their country and the socioeconomic status of people in crowded living conditions more than their policy. And then I wanted to look at two more countries. There's South Korea and New Zealand. South Korea and New Zealand both uh, had pretty draconian lockdowns and quarantine requirements, and it was effective. It kept their deaths and cases low. Like you look at South Korea, they had only 300,000 cases and only 3,000 deaths. I mean, compare that to Sweden, which is a smaller country population-wise than South Korea by a fairly large margin, and yet they had 5 times the number of deaths. And the United States obviously has way more deaths, but America is a much larger country as well. But relative to population, Korea had very low death numbers and very few cases. You can see that their case were quite low while they were instituting measures. But then you notice that around the time of the Delta variant, and now it's higher than it has before. And if you look at New Zealand, a similar thing happens. Their cases are now much higher. Now, this is all relative. I mean, this looks bad, but if you look at their daily cases, it's like 200. I mean, look at the United States. We're relatively in a kind of a valley in our caseloads, but it's still in the 90,000s. New Zealand is at, their peak is like 200. So you got to look at the Y scale on this. And, Korea is running around 2,000. Um, which is similar to where the low numbers in Sweden are, with Sweden being a much less populous country. So this, I think, South Korea and New Zealand illustrate that even if you do a great job of controlling the cases within your own country and trying to keep things out, um, you as long as a virus is circulating globally, you're not going to be able to keep the thing out forever. You just can't do it. You cannot live isolated from the world and restrict travel and do this over the long term. Eventually, the the virus will attack these countries, and they are going to see spikes. What they need to do is probably vaccinate their population a little better. New Zealand and South Korea did not do a great job of vaccinating their population. I think the vaccinations are still ongoing there, and they need to do that because they're not going to be able to keep the virus out through lockdowns and non-pharmacologic measures as they have been. I think their thought process was initially that they were going to lock down and hopefully get it controlled worldwide, and then they could reopen. But as we said in the previous video, I mean, even deer have COVID at this point. COVID is not going away. This is the new normal, and we are going to deal with COVID, I think, for the foreseeable future. I don't see it ever going away, honestly. So making all kinds of predictions. It'll be interesting to come back to this video in the future and see how wrong I was. But in terms of this wave in the winter, yes, I absolutely feel like it's going to happen. This was the wave that happened last winter when most people in the United States were not having family get-togethers and getting together with their friends for Christmas and Thanksgiving. They were trying to make smaller gatherings or avoid them for the most part. This year, I think almost no one is doing that. Everyone is getting together with everyone. There's going to be large gatherings. I mean, we are just going to have a lot of people in close proximity eating and socializing together, which I think is good. I mean, we need to kind of go back to some semblance of normality because this isn't going away. What are we going to do? Not have family get-togethers for the rest of our lives? I think that's kind of unrealistic. People are vaccinated or have natural immunity, so I think infection rates are going to go up, but death rates will be decoupled again, and I think death rates will be much lower. Case numbers, I think, also will be less. So I think we have most of the delta has gone through the population at this point, and so we are going to see a slight uptick. My prediction is it will not be as bad as last winter's, and that the death rates will decouple more. And as years go by, we're going to have smaller and smaller surges, and that's going to be the way it plays out.